when you hit, when you record, you have two options. So this will go to the cloud, and Marcella can retrieve it and add it onto to our website. Now, I understand. I do want to discuss. I do want to discuss with you where Rabbi Singer left off, because I'm to some extent drawn to the idea of picking up where she left off, because you're doing this contiguous study of the Tanakh. But I'm also kind of feeling like I want to do other stuff. Now, you can say, "Oh, Rabbi, it's your choice," and that's fine. I'll accept that invitation. But if there's a consensus that after today, because today I'm not prepared to do that, if there's a consensus that you want to pick up, you were in one of the books of Kings, I'll do that, and not reluctantly. It's just I like to focus. I like to focus on like what I think of to be the good stuff, which are stories or other narrative kinds of things that you can really sink your teeth into. And if you're doing a contiguous reading, then you sometimes get, in Kings, for instance, you get lost in the battles and the kings and the deaths, and you end up, doing a lot of reading and not a lot of discussing. Christine, is that a hand?
Yeah, I think that Rabbi Singer decided that we really didn't need to repeat all of the names, and we kind of took some shortcuts there, because it was like, new, that's nice for their families, but we're not their family. And so she sort of cut to the meat of it. However, for myself, I'm happy to see where, how your head's working, and, where you want to go with it. I'm very happy to be, focused on, texts that are problematic or helpful or whatever. That's fine with me. What about other people?
I have, Jane, go ahead.
Well, speaking just for myself, and I need to warn you, Rabbi, I'm the historian in the group.
Yeah.
I would just rather go back to Torah study. I find it very enriching. And I found that, going through these histories is fine, but it just seems to be one battle after another, one piece of bloodshed after another. I didn't feel that I was gaining much in terms of study. So my vote is to follow your lead and hopefully go back to the Torah text.
Yes.
I have a request, though. In my learning style, I find it very difficult to just read new and retain it. It's just not my learning style. And I would hope that I would be more conscientious as a student if I knew in advance when you announce, say, and I don't want to make it difficult or clumsy for you as well as other students, but if I know in advance, like when you publicize or give us a reminder of these Saturday morning sessions, if I could have read the material in advance to absorb some of that, I'd be more prepared as a discussant.
Okay, so before I respond to you, Felice, is this Ruth Geller on the phone here?
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem. Okay, I can. So Felice, I'm happy to do that. Totally happy to do that. It requires of me to getting into a rhythm that I'm not used to. So I usually figure out what I'm doing the day before.
Well, that's why, if we go the route of Torah study, we all have books, and in advance to know so whatever you decide to do, I just would like some material that I could absorb in advance.
So let me.
Can I just add to what Felice is saying? And Jane, our habit in the past was to go through the text with somebody reading it aloud, and I found that wonderful. I really enjoyed hearing the words together. It felt like we were bringing it together. So reading it before would be great. But I
Yeah,
would love to
and
have it.
continue with the reading at the
Yeah,
session is fine with me.
No, exactly, Felice. So, but I get a lot about hearing it read.
Yeah.
And that kind of audio learning. And
Well, I'm not,
and I feel like I get to know people a little bit better.
all right. Yeah, Sandra.
Well, I don't know how many people here were with Rabbi Singer's Torah study from the beginning. I was one of them, and it took her, I don't know how many years, 7 years, 8.
Oh, no.
Lynn.
9 years, 9 years.
So
Wow.
I'm saying if it might be good to start over just to do whatever you want, because not everybody here
Yeah.
was on Zoom when we started. Well, it wasn't on Zoom when we started. It was in
Yeah,
person.
in person.
I understand. All right, so we're careening toward the end of the book of Numbers, most of which is interesting. There's no good reason to study the first Torah portion of the book of Numbers, because it's a recitation of names, names and numbers, which is how it gets its name in English. In Hebrew, it's Bamidbar, as you might know, in the desert. What I prepared for today is a little off the derech. It's a little off the way. But there are three items that I've selected, which I suspect from the way you guys are talking already, that we're not going to get through all three pieces. You do fine, and if not, and then 2 weeks, we're going to have to meet in 3 weeks from now, because Lord knows when a rabbi starts a new job, he deserves a vacation at the end of July. My family and I have a tradition of taking a week summer vacation somewhere. And in this case, it has to center on our granddaughter rather, Ava, who starts kindergarten sometime early in August. So in order not to disrupt the beginning of school for her, we're taking this vacation. After services next Friday, Betsy and I are catching a red eye to Indianapolis, and we'll miss the following Shabbat. So we'll be picking this up in 3 weeks, okay? But let me assert, if I haven't said this clearly enough, that the process of doing Torah, studying Torah, dialoguing and arguing over Torah texts is really one of the things I love the most. And I hope that the number of faces on the screen this morning is indicative of what will happen going into the future, unless of course you hang up and say, this Cohen is a bummer, I'm never going to study with him again. But if you like to study Torah, and I'm using the word Torah, by the way, broadly, not just to include the 5 books, then I think this could be a really nice class. I think that's all I have to say by way of introduction, unless there's anything else any of you want to say, or any questions that you have. One other piece. I will always have. You must all know about Sefaria, right? You can't not know about Sefaria anymore. And if you find in your tzedakah giving that you have a couple of bucks that you'd like to give to one of the greatest Jewish intellectual enterprises of the modern era, you might consider giving Sefaria a couple of bucks, because it's just a remarkable Jewish library that's not going to go stale, by which I mean the people who run it are continually adding new texts, and they're continually exploring ways in which they can help people work with texts. So point being that I have these texts selected from Sefaria, and as soon as I tell you what I'd like to do this morning, but under no pressure to complete it, depending on the discussion, I'll bring it up on the screen share. Now, this doesn't, of course, mean you couldn't have a book in front of you. The Sefaria Bible text uses the Jewish Publication Society translation. So if you have a different translation, that would always be good to have up in front of you. My favorite, most recent translation is the Robert Alter translation, which I haven't unpacked yet from the boxes of books that are sitting on the table in my office. All right, so the three texts I want to look at. One's a kind of a shorter one, but I think it's a totally amazing text, and that's the one where Elijah goes to die. Its style is a little unusual, as you'll see, and its thematics, I think, really tell us something about what the author wants us to think about Elijah, and you'll see what I mean. The second are the first two chapters of the book of Job, where the problematic of the book of Job gets set up, and you get to wrestle with who Satan is in the story and what's going on, and of course what the big theme of this is, like why does all this stuff happen to Job? And should we have some time left, we'll look at the first chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes. The chapter that says there's nothing new under the sun. And they're all really good, and they're all kind of different. Well, they are different from each other. Now I've spoken enough. Let me get up the screen share. Oh, I haven't. I remember. I gotta. There's something that you got to do. I forgot. Give me a second. So it's the second chapter of the second book of Kings. There it is. So I'm tempted to ask, and I will in a second, as soon as I take down the chat here. So Elijah Elijah, unlike Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, or some of the minor prophets, is not a literary prophet. He doesn't. There are no writings that are attributed to him, but they're really great stories attributed to Elijah. And this is the culmination of a few of the stories that I'm really fond of. So, what do we know about Elijah? What is his, as the tradition about him evolves? What is that tradition? Who is this guy?
Went up to heaven.
A little louder.
What?
Anybody? Well, there's
He's
one.
supposed to foretell the coming of the Mashiach.
That's right. He's and what is there are actually about 52 ways across the year that we acknowledge this. But what is the most powerful of that acknowledgement? You all know it. You all know.
Passover? Passover.
The Havdalah?
Yeah, you got that. Well, we'll get to Havdalah in a second, but they're both.
Passover. Passover. Passover.
Passover.
Passover.
Yeah,
We set a place for him.
You have a set place, yeah.
Post Eliyahu, right? The cup of Elijah filled to the brim, and you open the door, and you sing Eliyahu Hanavi.
Yeah.
And if you got kids at the table, all the grown-ups say, "Oh, look, there's a little bit less wine there because Elijah came in and took a sip of the wine." And if you don't have that tradition, then you start doing it. But of course, what happens when you open the door for Elijah? Or what doesn't happen? He ain't there, right? He ain't there. So you wait till next week. And so you sing Eliyahu Hanavi, and then at Havdalah, that's the final moment of Havdalah. You put out the candle and you sing that same song. Bim Herav Yameinu Yavo Aleinu. Soon in our day, he will come among us. Im Mashiach ben David, with the Messiah, the son of David. So the reason he occupies this role, now you probably already know this, but this is the story that leads into that legend. And by the way, there are hundreds and hundreds of Elijah's stories in both the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic traditions of Elijah sort of quietly entering into the life of a community, of an individual, of a family, and subtly changing their lives. He doesn't do the big miracles. He does the little ones. Family needs money for Pesach, and he goes and they treat him well, and he leaves them enough money for the Sidorim, that sort of thing.
Sarah, I'm on Zoom.
So this is the Ur tale. This and it's a really great one because of the story and because of its literary character. All right. So we'll do a couple verses and then I'll stop and ask a couple questions. And I always start with a little bit of the Hebrew. Vayehi b'ha'alot Adonai et Eliyahu b's'ara b'shamayim vayelech Eliyahu ve'Elisha min ha'Gilgal. So when God was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha had set out from Gilgal. Now, just a second. I don't know what the had is doing there. The HAD. It seems like an unnecessary word, and I think it changes the meaning of the verse. So Elijah and Elisha set out from Gilgal. So they were in this place, Gilgal, and literally speaking, what is this first sentence doing for us or to us? Yeah.
Just setting the time and place and the circumstances. You know, I always heard that, you know, that Elijah was going to come back when people had learned how to live with one another and treat each other with respect and so on and so forth. And that this setting out from Gilgal gives you a sense that, you know, he is on the planet with, you know, Elisha, and that something is going to happen imminently.
Yeah, well, you know what's going to happen. That's
The whirlwind. Yeah, right.
So what do we call that in literary analysis? It's not a complicated word.
Oh,
Is it a foreshadowing or
foreshadowing?
The end is no surprise. We know what the end is going to be. So we're kind of set up for it. And this immediately takes on, now here I wish I had a little more equipment, but here this already sets up a kind of a folkloristic pattern. This is you got Elijah and Elisha, and we know that at the end God is going to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind. And whirlwind, I guess, is the term that's come to be common. The Hebrew word is sa'ara, which has a multiplicity of meanings. Typically in modern Hebrew, it means like storm, but that's less important. So I'll sort of show you my hand right away. Elisha becomes the prophet because he comes to occupy Elijah's place.
Mhm.
And in any event, you have this partnership of a major prophet and a minor prophet, you might say. Does this remind us of anybody else in the Hebrew Bible? Who's got a sidekick? Who takes over?
Moses and Aaron.
Moses and Aaron.
No. Moses and Joshua.
Oh, and Joshua, right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Moses and Joshua. But
Yeah.
Aaron, you may remember, dies sort of early in the book.
Right,
of Numbers.
right.
He meets his maker after the incident with the rock and the water.
Mhm.
So you got these two guys. They're heading out. We don't know where, but we know where they're heading out from. Vayomer, and I won't read the Hebrew all the way through, but I think it's important to at least hear the rhythm of the Hebrew. Vayomer Eliyahu el Elisha, Shevna fo, ki Adonai shlachani ad Beit El. Vayomer Elisha, Chai Adonai v'chei nafshecha im ezovcha v'yirdu Beit El. V'yirdu Beit El. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for God has sent me on to Beit El. As God lives and you live," Elisha said, "I will not leave you." So they went down to Beit El. So what do we see in this verse? What are some of the things we see in this verse?
Well, Elisha is very loyal to
Yeah.
Elisha. Won't leave his side no
Right.
matter what.
Right, and the Hebrew, as actually I read the Hebrew wrong. Ezvecha, the Hebrew root azav means to abandon, which has a stronger tone to it than here. I will not abandon you, says Elisha. And so it's a sense of loyalty, partnership, brotherhood. I mean, they're not literally. That's what's going on here. Now, disciples of the prophets at Beit El came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that God's going to take your master away from you today?" He replied, "I know it. I know it too. Be silent." So that's another statement of loyalty. You know, the people come out and they're whispering. And there are at least two things going on here. And I'm interested to see if you see anything else. There are at least two things going on here. One is all the prophets at Beit El know what's going on. Like it appeared. It was reported on NPR that morning, right? That Elisha and Elijah, that Elijah is going to be taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, and everybody knows it. There was Twitter and there was emails and texts, and they all come out to Elisha and they say, as it's written here, Elijah's going to be taken up today. And again, Elisha says, I know this. So they went on to Jericho. They went on to Jericho. Does anybody see anything else going on in here? Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of curious because, why doesn't he take the opportunity to say, don't worry, he will not abandon us?
I'm sorry, who will not abandon who?
Elisha has an opportunity here to say to the masses or whoever is twittering away, he's like telling them to shut up, but instead he could have taken the opportunity to say, I know it, but he will never be away from us. He could have shared what he was told. I will not abandon you.
Well, I frequently say to people when they come up with a good idea that if you happen, I don't know if you're retired or not, even if you're not retired, you should
I'm retired.
write that story. You should write that. You should turn it into. You should midrashize this story and add that in. But what you'll see here is a recurring pattern, which is part of the folkloristic element of this story. Because then the disciple. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
To me, it implies to me that the disciples of the prophets at Bethel, they're kind of condescending to Elisha by saying, "Oh, we know this, and you probably don't."
Okay. I'll talk to you.
And maybe he's being defensive by
that's
telling them to
nice.
be
That's
silent because he
lovely.
feels
Okay.
like they're talking down to
Okay,
him,
I'll let
saying,
her
"You
know.
know something
Okay,
you don't."
Well,
That's what I get out of that.
Maybe so. But like I said, you'll see this as a recurring pattern right in the very next verse. Anybody want to add something else?
Yeah, I think to me it kind of indicates, Elisha is the minor prophet here, and it may not be his role to announce what God is going to do. That, there's a kind of humility. He acknowledges his awareness, but who is he to be talking about God's plan? So his inability or his unwillingness to reassure may really be a kind of, this is not for us to be dissecting, for me to be dissecting. God will do what God is going to do.
Yeah, so I think these kinds of comments are worth taking it under consideration once we get to the end of this, because this much I'm not going to spoil. If you don't know the story, you'll see how things go as the story continues. Because now the disciples of the prophets who were at Jericho came over to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that God will take your master away from you today?" He replied, "I know, too. Be silent." The exact same language, right? Elijah said to him, "Stay here." Now, so Elijah's now back in the act. "Stay here," I guess in Jericho, "for God has sent me on to the Jordan. As God lives and as you live, I will not leave you," he said. And the two of them went on. Now, just a second here.
He said that before too.
Yeah, I just want to make I want to make sure. Yeah, it's the same language, and so this
Yes.
kind of repetition is a folk, as I say, is a couple of different folkloristic patterns that I think are, to my mind, give us a kind of an assurance, and at the same time, I guess, building a picture of the world. But but this language is being repeated both from the prophets of one place and another to Elisha and Elijah to Elisha. And at the very least, what does it do? What does it tell us about Elisha? At the very least, it's saying, again, the matter of loyalty, a really strong loyalty. Although on the other hand, one thinks, what's to discourage him? Why shouldn't he go? I mean, and maybe we can ponder that question when we get to the end. So this is a big event. This is a big event, right? 50 of the disciples of the prophets followed and stood at a distance as the two of them stopped at the Jordan. Okay, so now tell me about the Jordan River, not the current Jordan River, which is a little stream about yay wide and about yay deep, but the historical Jordan River. Tell me about what the Jordan River means. What's the symbolism of the Jordan?
The Jordan River is the dividing line between the outside world or the other world and the promised land. This is what the Hebrews, B'nai Israel, has to cross after Moses' death. And Moses is not allowed to enter the promised land, supposedly because he sinned by striking the rock.
Yeah, well, that's another story. Maybe we'll get to that next year because because I'll say just as an aside, I'm not going to turn and do that story, but the interpretation of that is very problematic and very interesting. But it was on account of that event that Moses and Aaron were both prohibited from entering the promised land. Aaron dies rather quickly, and Moses goes through to the end of the book of Deuteronomy. But why of it is an interesting question. So Elijah, well, we haven't seen them cross the Jordan yet, but unlike Moses, Elijah gets to cross the Jordan, and the Jordan, the Ardennes is this highly symbolic body of water. So they got there, and now what was Moses's big tool? He had a major tool that he applied
His staff.
Yeah, right, and turned it into a stake. He is holding it up. Sometime in the desert, there's a plague, and snakes crawl around it. From whence we get the symbol for the pharmacy, for being people who dispense medicine. So Elijah doesn't have a staff; he has a mantle. And I want to double check the Hebrew word here. So Vayehi Avram ve'Eliyahu Amar el Elisha Sha'al Ma e'eselach b'terem alakech me'imach. Vayomer. Wait, I'm sorry, I skipped a verse. Beg your pardon. I'm at verse 8. I jumped ahead. Vayikach Eliyahu et Adam. I'm sorry. Adarto. Vayiglom vayekeh et hamayim. Vayechatzu hena vehena v'ya'avru shnehem v'chovra. Elijah took the mantle and rolling it up, he struck the water. It divided to the right and to the left, so the two of them crossed over on dry land. Does that remind you of anything? It ought to.
Yeah.
Crossing the Red Sea.
It's a mini crossing of the Red Sea, and that's precisely what the author has in mind. The Jordan, he rolls up his mantle so it kind of becomes a staff. He slaps the water with his mantle and it splits, and the two of them cross over on dry land. But
Rabbi, what do they mean by a mantle? Is he taking a cape or something? I'm not quite sure what this mantle is.
I think it's like a cape. Yeah, like that.
Okay.
Something like that.
Uh-huh.
By the way, Derech Hagav, this is totally irrelevant, but a couple of people have asked me, given my behavior, my comportment on the bima, that you've noted that I wear a large talit. And people want to know, was I raised Orthodox? No, I was not raised Orthodox. And in point of fact, if you looked at the talit, you know the kind of talitot Orthodox men usually wear, It's, you know, sort of yellowish or whitish with lots of stripes. This doesn't have any of that. It's
Yeah.
a tallit that Betsy and I bought in Yafo in Israel about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. I just like it, you know, you know, when it's cold, it warms me up, and when it's hot, it makes me hot. And by the way, if you're a person who carries a couple of extra pounds, that tallit covers a wealth of sins. It doesn't mean I'm going to have you guys, you know, sitting men apart anytime soon. So they crossed over on dry land. Now, unfortunately, this is a minor, unfortunately. The Hebrew word in the Exodus text for the dry land is yabashah, and here it's charava. I would have been happier if the author used the other word, just to tell you, just to give you a stronger hint that he's connecting this story to that story. But clearly, it's intended. It's an echo of the crossing of the Sea of Reeds by the Israelites. And as they were crossing, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" Elisha answered, "Let a double portion of your spirit pass on to me." Vayihina pi shnai, oh no, beg your pardon. Vayomer, I'm looking for the Hebrew here. Vayomer Elisha, Vayihina pi shnayim beruchacha alai. So the word is ruach, right? It's a word I'm sure most of you know. A double portion of your spirit. So what is he asking for here? What is it? What is the author telling us about who Elisha wants to become and who he may become?
Does that mean he wants to become the major prophet?
Yeah, I mean, I might put it a different way, but yeah, that's what he wants.
He wants to take his place. He wants to take Elijah's place.
I want to take Elijah's place. Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
To me, it means, you know, I need strength to do this, what you're asking of me. And if I have twice your spirit, maybe I will be up to the job, because he comes across as a very humble guy.
Yeah, wonderful. That's okay. I like that. I like that. So it's yeah. Prepare me to take your place. But if I like that, if I'm going to take your place, but you know, Ellie, if I'm going to take your place, Ellie, I need double what you got, because I got a long way to go to become anything like you. Betsy?
Well, I think this relationship between the two of them, I mean, we saw it already in previous line that we read, but the thing that resonates in my head, this idea of loyalty and humility, it really reminds me of Naomi and Ruth. It seems very warm and very strong and very beautiful.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah,
that's nice. And you know, I'm trying to remember elements of the relationship between Joshua and Moses. And while it has a master-disciple, there is a master-disciple relationship, obviously, I can't remember, and I could be wrong about this, actual interactions in the narrative that express this kind of loyalty. I mean, we know that Moses lays his hands on Joshua. I mean, Moses willingly passes on. And by the way, what do we call this? The mantle of leadership. We'll see what I mean more literally. We'll see more literally what I mean in a few verses. Moses passes on the mantle of leadership to Joshua, and Joshua becomes a very powerful leader. And by the way, you know, when you read those stories in the book of Joshua, elements of the conquest of Canaan echo what happened in the desert and in the Egyptian experience. So let a double portion of your spirit pass on to me. Vayomer Hikshia lish'ol. You've asked a difficult thing, he said. If you see me as I am being taken from you, this will be granted to you. If not, it will not. And so now this is hold on, Christine. This is a strange kind of culmination of all of these people beseeching Elisha not to go, and Elisha saying, I'm going to go, and saying twice to Elijah, I'm going to go. And now Elisha may be expressing a kind of a demand, an insecurity, a quid pro quo, I don't know, or another one, sine qua non, a necessary condition. If I'm going to pass on my leadership to you, you've got to see what's about to happen. Though we have no reason to believe that Elisha is going to back off. But Elijah, I guess, is saying this as a way of making a demand and making certain that this is what Elisha's intentions are. Christine?
Well, there's passing the mantle is also something which has resonances to in today's world. For when you hood a doctoral student, you're passing the mantle on, and you're passing your spirit to that person.
Yeah, very good.
Very much so.
Yeah.
There's an anecdote, if you'll indulge me for a second. In the early days of the AIDS crisis, my dear friend Paul died, and his partner, and with whom he was very much in love. At his memorial service, somebody read this portion.
Oh yeah.
Which I thought was very, very beautiful, and there's a different spin on the relationship, obviously, in the text, but it worked. It really worked.
That's interesting.
Anyway.
That is a good story. Thanks.
Hmm.
Anything else?
I have just one question. I mean, I'm looking at this and wondering, well, if it's not going to be Elisha who follows him as a leader, who would it be? Right? There's no setup of an alternative. So is it just that Elisha feels humble in the face of what he knows is coming anyway? Or is he thinking possibly maybe somebody else would get this entirely who hasn't served him? And maybe there's a little feeling of, I deserve this because I'm the one who followed you all the way here, which would be a slightly less humble thing. So it kind of gives Elisha two possible interpretations of his motivation.
So I mean, there is nobody else, right? They don't have a Speaker of the House to take over if the Vice President should die. But I mean, what we're seeing, all we know about Elisha is what we're seeing in this story. I mean, if we were to do a character study of Elisha, then I would pull up, all the texts in which he appears, and we could see if he has a, moment of arrogance. But the Elisha in this story is enormously humble, right? He's and humble and loyal. I think we can see those two characteristics, and desirous of assuming the role of Elijah's quality of prophecy. Yeah, Betsy.
I also think this line adds to the folk tale of it. Kind of mystical, a little bit. It's saying I can't. It's a little mysterious. Because he says it's really not in my control, and you're going to have to wait and see. There's another, it's about God, but it seems very folksy to me in the way it's being told.
Mm-hmm.
The style of it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's see where it goes. And we're coming to the end. As they kept on walking and talking, a fiery chariot with fiery horses suddenly appeared and separated one from the other. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. The same word, of course, Sa'ara Hashamayim. The Sa'ara Hashamayim. He goes up to heaven in a whirlwind. I'll read the next verse. Elisha saw it and he cried out, "Oh, Father, Father, Israel's chariots and riders." When he could no longer see him, he grasped his garments and rent them in two. So, of course, renting one's garments is a symbol of mourning. But of course, in our world, we rent our garments at the occasion of a death. What's happened here? Elijah has not died, right? He's gone up to heaven in a chariot, and that, of course, is the source of all the stories about Elijah being around and coming out of the shadows to help people throughout the centuries. He picked up Elijah's mantle, which he had dropped from him, and he went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. So this is the passing on of the mantle, and for all I know, this is where the phrase comes from.
Wait, can I just ask a quick question here? How do we know that, I mean, from Alicia's point of view, what leads, did I mishear you? Why wouldn't Alicia think that Elijah died?
Because he gets, the image isn't very clear. I don't know if he gets in the chariot, but that would be the likeliest place. He gets up on the chariot and he says, "Hi, O silver," and he goes up into the heavens. So he goes up alive.
But by renting his garments, I mean, that's a symbol of mourning. So it seems to me Alicia thinks he's definitely dead, gone.
Gone, yeah. But we know from the beginning of the story, that's that's the foreshadowing of the story, that he's going to go up to heaven in a whirlwind. So
I'm on the same page, Betsy. Isn't that symbolic of death?
Yeah, to me, right. That's what I think. To me, it looks like from Alicia's point of view, he's dead. He doesn't know there are going to be all these stories that we have about Elijah appearing and doing stuff.
Well, I have two responses to it. First, he knows that his master is gone, and presumably for good. So whether he dies or not, this is a total loss. And the other thing is, and here I don't know the answer for sure. I don't know, and this is a historical question. And though I say I don't usually enter into historical questions, this is one I would like to know the answer to, and that is, at what point in the history of the development of halakha, of Jewish law, is renting one's garment a sign only of mourning, as opposed to maybe a sign of loss of other things as well? I don't know the answer to that. But certainly, hold on for just a second. But certainly from the view of the tradition, which may not be the view the author intends, or may not be the view the author intends Alicia to have, from the point of view of the tradition, he doesn't die. Because of the whole folklore, the whole folklore situation for this guy.
This is where the UFO people come in.
Cue the History Channel.
Yeah.
This is the story they use all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, don't they tear their clothes in the book of Job
Yes.
also?
Yeah, but people have died.
Right.
Yeah, and we're gonna turn to that momentarily. Actually, I saw a hand, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
there's just something that struck me within this, and I don't know the answer, but it's a question, is in the span of a couple of verses here, we see all the elements of wind, fire, earth, and water. And I feel like that's not coincidental, but I don't know why. So I would just, if anybody has any thoughts on that, it just struck me.
Well, first of all, the wind, fire, earth, and water is Aristotelian. So I'm not sure you're suggesting that. I'm not sure.
I definitely was not thinking of Aristotle. No, I was just thinking of them as traditionally we think of them as the four base elements, right?
Yeah, well, with the four base elements, that's Aristotle.
Okay.
But
No connection, maybe.
no, I'm not saying there's no connection. I'm trying to push your idea further. I mean, it is all inclusive, and maybe that's all you really need to say. In one of my synagogues along the way, by the way, in their chapel, they had this wonderful painting of Elijah going up to heaven in a fiery chariot, and we had a morning minyan down there in a Torah study class, and I remember telling people the meaning of that, and they, because nobody goes beyond reading the Torah, into the other books. They didn't know that. It's a wonderful picture. But let's finish. So he picked up Elijah's mantle, which had dropped from him, and he went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Taking the mantle that had dropped from Elijah, he struck the water and said, "Where is the Eternal, the God of Elijah?" As he too struck the water, it parted right to the right and to the left, and Elisha crossed over. When the disciples of the prophets at Jericho saw him from a distance, they exclaimed, "The spirit of Elijah has settled on Elisha." And they went to meet him and bowed low before him to the ground. I think this is pretty clear. Anybody want to add something to this? I mean, it's a really beautiful story, I think, and it's a story about it tells us a lot about Elijah and Elisha and the tradition, and the author's genius, I think. Well, maybe I don't have to make him a genius, and the author's intelligence of echoing this crossing of the sea, although you only cross the sea of reeds, in one direction. Here, the power that Elisha has inherited is symbolized by him doing on the other side of the Jordan, on one side of the Jordan, what Elijah had done on the other side of the Jordan. So we now know that he has that double portion from Elijah that he requested.
Doesn't it seems to me that Elisha's humility goes out the window. My interpretation is that he didn't wait for God, but became, forthright in deciding on his own. I'm picking up Elijah's mantle and becoming the leader. Heck with God.
So what would you have preferred? If you were writing this story, how would you end it?
Well, my quandary about God is forthcoming, but I always have trouble with that concept. But a leader should pick up the mantle and become the leader. And all of a sudden, Elisha becomes strong in that, has hubris rather than humility.
Okay.
And, she sort of, he sort of circumvents God, in my opinion.
All right. So, Wendy.
Yeah, a couple of things. First thing, like what Jason was saying with Aristotle's 4 elements, which are definitely not my 4 elements because I'm a scientist. But the whole image of fire with the fiery chariots, that's something we see a lot in the Tanakh, with the burning bush, with Mount Sinai basically being a volcano, and all that stuff. But the other thing I'm kind of curious about that passage at the end, why is Elisha saying, where's the God of Elijah? Why isn't he saying it's his God? So I find that moderately troubling, that he's not claiming God for himself, but it's the God of Elijah.
Anybody got a response? Christine?
Yeah. I think it's another sign that he's not filled with hubris, that in fact, he's still very humble. God is like somebody who is a parent to someone who is much more filled with the Spirit than he feels he is. But I also had a naturalist, idea about the fiery chariots and so on and so forth. If you live in a truly desert area, not this area, but real desert, the sandstorms that occur oftentimes create like mini tornadoes that can not only block out the sun, but sometimes they really turn rosy around the sun so that they do look like the sky's on fire. And it is like a whirlwind. So so this is the naturalist in me, but I don't find it as mysterious as all that, because it's absolutely awe-inspiring if you've seen it. I was in Egypt once and it happened, and it was just, it was gobsmacking, absolutely amazing. So, I feel like I'm a little planted on the earth, and sometimes I try to find natural explanations for things that are metaphorical.
I'll get back to it in a second. Betsy?
I was just going to say, I appreciate that, but I usually think about these miracles that it doesn't really matter if there's a natural explanation.
Yeah, it doesn't.
The fact that it happened at that moment, whatever.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to say that Elijah said to Elisha, if you see what's going to happen, then you're going to get, God's blessing on this. And in fact, Elisha did see it. He saw this fiery chariot. And so, I agree with you, actually, Christine, that I think this helps maintain his sense as a humble prophet, because whether he wants it or not, now he has it.
Here it is.
He has to pick it up and he has to go forward with it, because now he's carrying this burden. And I'm not sure the text is 100% clear. I think you could say, okay, maybe he's arrogant about it, but I don't see that. I think that picking up the mantle of leadership is often, very overwhelming, and it can fill you with often fills you with insecurity first, and you grow into it to become, just like Moses did when he saw the burning bush. I mean, he wanted to run. He did not have the confidence. And I don't really know what happens to Elisha now. I don't know if there are more stories about him. I can't remember offhand anything else about him, how he grows from this or where he goes after this.
So Jane,
Yeah,
and
we studied Elisha, the people that were in Rabbi Singer's study group. We studied Elisha, and she kept pointing out how he needed supplemental aids in order to continue as a prophet. And I remember coming to his defense, because I really didn't know until today the story of Elisha and Elijah. So thank you. But I remember saying Elijah is a hard act to follow. I mean, you're not going to get a doppelganger. You're not going to get this absolute double of Elijah. So, cut Elisha some slack here, But I have always, when we did that, I always thought of Elisha more, as you say, as a second prophet or a minor prophet, certainly trying to follow in Elijah's footsteps, but not quite making it.
yeah, well, but we're not going to study Elisha's stories, at least not presently.
Mhm.
So we can't.
But the stories do go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that regard, we got to cut him a little slack. So I want to make two quick comments, and then I'm looking at the time. We'll have a look maybe at the first chapter of Job. So two things. First, the business of God. If I were to put a bunch of liberal Jews, if I were to put 50 liberal Jews in a room, picked at random, scientifically, and I asked them in some scientifically precise way, how many of you have a problem with the traditional image of God? 45 hands would be raised. There's no question about it. And then I would probably go on and give a long lecture, and I would say, how many of you have seriously studied modern Jewish thought? How many of you have seriously taken on the writings of men and women who have similarly reconstructed, and I don't mean this in a reconstructionist way, reconstructed God to accommodate the needs of modernity. Like my talk last night, about Martin Buber's very it's a faith claim that Martin Buber makes in positing the I Thou experience, the I Thou meeting, but it doesn't then get enlarged into miracles and sacred texts. And so that, for me, that's one reason, but only one reason why I found Buber interesting to me over the years. So the second part of that is, when you read the text and it talks about God, it's perfectly fine for you to say or think, this is a God image that doesn't work for me. But you gotta, but then you also gotta read the story in its context, and just do it in that way. You just follow it in that way. Second, naturalist explanations. There was a guy, I believe it was Velikovsky, who wrote a book, I believe, called Worlds in Collision, in which he posits some cosmic event that happens to coincide with the liberation of the Israelites that caused the sea to split. And that cosmic event ended just as they got on the other side of the sea and the Egyptians drowned. Um, I'm a very big skeptic about the reality of miracles. I really and truly am. But if I read a story, a biblical miracle story, I don't have to struggle to rationalize it, to naturalize it. That's what the story is about. Now, having said that, Christine, your image of what could happen in the desert might well have been something the author of the story had witnessed and
Resonated, yeah.
provided. What am I saying? Hallucinated?
No, I said resonated.
Resonated. I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Resonated. And that was that was part of the sources from which he constructed the story.
Yeah.
Not for every biblical story, but for many of them. I'm interested in the literary character of the story itself, the place, the time, the characters, the theme, and how God interacts in the story. In other words, treating it as sacred literature, but if you drop the word sacred, treating it as literature and using some of those tools we have in our back pocket to understand the story. I will not teach these stories and tell you from my own view that these were true stories, that they really happened. They're just really interesting stories that have a lot to teach.
Yeah. Well,
Christine?
I have a question, Rabbi, that we haven't discussed. I've seen from a Jew this going from right to left. What's the symbolism? What's the interpretation as to the meaning of that?
I'm not following the question, I'm afraid.
I think it said in the story, and when some Jews pray, they turn their bodies to the right and left. As is in the story, they strike, or my association is Elijah, help me with the actual story.
The part where he strikes the water and it parts.
Thank you,
right and left.
Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Is there an association with the way some Jews pray, turning
Well,
in a prayer, they'll turn to the right and left?
well, I don't have a good answer for that, but I will say that the time at which the story was written, I'm assuming the whole Jewish liturgical project had yet to begin. So while as liturgy and and davening evolved, this story might have had some impact on it, but I don't think there's no liturgical practice that's common yet for it to have influenced the story. That's all I can tell you. Christine?
just a quick note on rending the clothes. I think that to me, it just shows that even in the midst of knowing that this is not real death, you can feel the loss.
Sure.
It's people are complex. They have mixed emotions, and so he can know that Elijah is being taken up or wherever, and yet it's his friend, and I don't have a problem rending the cloth. I think that we've all experienced something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Betsy?
So I just want to clarify before we leave this story. We've talked about major prophets and minor prophets. And what could you remind me, what is the difference between a major prophet and a minor prophet?
I'm sorry, it was just a term that I used because of the asymmetry between Elijah and Elisha.
Aren't they referred to that way? Aren't there a whole group of major prophets?
It has nothing to do with the quality of their prophecy. It has to do with the length of their books. So
well, that's what I wanted to know.
Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are called the major prophets because they wrote long books that are hard to read from cover to cover. But Amos and Jonah and Habakkuk, their books are smaller, so they're minor prophets by virtue of the length of their books.
So the fact that their books are smaller, is that because they did less? Can we assume that they were kind of more like bit players opposed to the big guys? Or they're just the stories in the minor prophets are just as powerful. And I'm trying to understand what it means to be a minor prophet. Is it just that the book is shorter, and does that have an implication?
I can't go any farther. I use the term, and not thinking that anybody would think about how the book of, Nevi'im, the book of prophets, is characterized. That's just, I mean, the book the Jonah story. It's just I think 3 or 4 chapters. I mean, it's a pretty darn good story. And meanwhile, Isaiah doesn't do a whole lot. He writes a whole lot, but he doesn't do a whole lot. So it has nothing to do with action or importance. It just, Isaiah had more time on his hands, and actually, I don't want to go too far afield of this. There are probably 3 or 4 different authors of Isaiah, but nevertheless, we can pretend that the final book that we have in our possession was written by one person. He had a lot of time and a really good grasp of the Hebrew language, to write his book. Because I don't think there's anything more to it than that.
I think it's a interesting question to look into, though. Like, does
you have my permission.
Yeah. Later.
All right, so I'm looking at the clock, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to skip this time out. I'm going to skip Job, and we'll look at Ezekiel, at Ecclesiastes, because we could make some headway in this book. Well, in this chapter, we're not going to make any headway in the entire book, of course. Okay, so Ecclesiastes is in the 3rd part of the Hebrew Bible, called the Ketuvim. Real brief. Sometimes when I'm feeling particularly heretical, I find the books that are in the writings to be really the best of the whole bunch. And of course, there's only a smidgen of truth to that. But this book has the Song of Songs, which is, it's a love poem. It's got the book of Job, which goes against the developing idea of a God of justice. It's got the book of Ruth in it, which is a nice, and the book of Esther. It's got all of these really good books in it. Among them is the book of Ecclesiastes, which, if you read it from cover to cover, it's hard to see a cohering thread that follows through the whole book. And sometimes, in fact, the author contradicts himself. But a few years ago, I did a close study of this with a friend of mine. We really enjoyed the book. And this friend of mine is Israeli, and he kept pointing out over and over again how elegant the Hebrew is. But it's got lots of little bits in it. It's got that famous section, which we're not going to read this morning. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose. I don't think the time for every purpose is in the actual original text, but because of Pete Seeger, and put it to, he changed the language a little bit and put it to music. It's very famous. And maybe even despite Pete Seeger, I often read that at funerals, because it just seems to encompass the contradictions of life, the time to be born, a time to die, and so forth. So that's one piece of this. The other is that that the Jewish tradition attributes 3 books to King Solomon. Ecclesiastes being one. Would anybody know the others?
Proverbs.
Yeah.
Song of Songs.
Song of Songs. So he wrote Song of Songs. The tradition goes, when he was a young man full of testosterone, and he wrote Proverbs at the height of his wisdom, because Solomon was said to be a wise man, as you know. And Ecclesiastes is in his old age, as when I say his bunions were really bothering him, and his bad teeth were really bothering him. There's a little bit of a cynical tone to this book. But scholars who know Hebrew better than I do say this couldn't possibly have been the case. The Hebrew styles are totally different, and none of them reflect a period of time in which Solomon lived. So it's a nice little thing to say about Solomon, and it's a nice way to tie the 3 books together, sort of metaphorically or midrashically, you might say. But we don't know who the author of any. We don't know who the author of any of these books is. I don't any of them. But it's a good book. So let's have a look at this first chapter. Well, here we go. So now, Divrei Kohelet ben David Melech Yerushalayim. The words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Let's see what the footnote is here. We can get to the footnote. If the footnotes are at the end of the book, I'm not going to pursue it. It may be telling you, it's probably telling you that nobody knows what the word Kohelet means. And that, by the way, is the Hebrew name of the book, right? Kohelet is, you don't call it Ecclesiastes, that's obviously Greek. Kohelet, but if you look at the word and you're able to read the Hebrew, the shoresh, the root is kuf he lamed, you might know the word kahal or kahila. It's a word that seems to imply that this person had some quality of developing a community, but it's not a word otherwise used for Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon. It's not. You don't see this word anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible referring to him, but it's Kohelet, the son of David. So this is partly where the legend arises that Kohelet is Solomon, and he's the king of the king in Jerusalem. Now here's a little thing which I'm going to tell you, even though it's taking away from our study and we're careening toward the end of the morning. If you read Hebrew or you speak Hebrew and you want to say in your mind, in Jerusalem, you might be tempted to say, Bil Yerushalayim, because that's how it would go. Except, and I don't remember the grammatical reasons, you don't say Bil Yerushalayim, you say Bi Yerushalayim. The Y drops, the Y becomes an elongation of the vowel. And not it drops, it ceases to be a consonant at that moment and becomes part of the vowel. All right, now that I've shown you how smart I am, so the words of Kohelet, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, and we get right into it. Hevel, Hevalim, Amar, Kohelet, Havel, Havalim, Hakol, Hevel. Utter futility, says Kohelet. Utter futility. All is futile. Now, you must know the King James version of this. What does it say in the King James? You know this, you may not know it's from King James.
Vanity, vanity.
Yeah, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. And I'm trying to remember how Alter translates it. But I don't have the book in front of me. The problem is that it's a problem. You don't know exactly how to translate Hevel, Havalim. But it's something about, we'll use the word here that they prefer, that the translators preferred here. Utter futility, all is futile. What real value is there for a man in all the gains he makes beneath the sun? One generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and glides back to where it rises. Southward blowing, turning northward, ever turning blows the wind. On its rounds, the wind returns. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, the streams flow back again. What's this guy's mood?
It's very pessimistic, very negative.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never liked this. And it says that your life has no meaning.
Yeah.
And I think that Bereshit, Sefer Bereshit tells us, Parsha Bereshit tells us that our life is full of meaning. We're created in God's image. How can we not be meaningful?
All right. So
it infuriates me, to tell you the truth. It infuriates me.
Well, it's good to be infuriated. It's good to be infuriated. However, sitting off to my left so you can't see him, I have successfully resurrected Kohelet. He's sitting right here to the left of me. Yeah, right here, Cohen. And Kohelet knows the book of Genesis, right? Yeah, I know the book. I know it by heart, for God's sake. So you tell him, we're created in the divine image, and God's presence infuses the universe. We learn all this from the first chapter of the book of Genesis, and divine light infuses the universe. And you say this to him. You say, buddy, Kohelet, buddy, what is this all about? How does he respond?
He would say, this is meaningless. It's still meaningless.
Yeah, but he's a smarter guy than just repeating the text.
Oh, okay.
I
don't know how he would respond.
Christine and Betsy.
I think that this is also, to me, having somebody respond this way is that they're at a point in their life when they're feeling some despair, and powerless, and that it just seems like, this is the way it is at the moment, if you will, and that they are not feeling up to the responsibility of being alive and of being a human on the planet. And on the one hand, the other hand says, it's very humble position. It's saying we're just little critters on the planet, and it's arrogant to think of us as even remotely godlike. And that the God-given stuff keeps going, and we are responsible, but this is not a moment where he's focused on the responsibility and ability to act in the world. It's more a despairing moment.
All right, so
It's
Betsy,
the next line, but I'm thinking that it's more acceptance
Oh,
of what it is. I mean, you can look at it as being depressed, but you can say, okay, the wind blows, and it comes back, the water goes into the ocean, and it comes
nice,
back.
Harvey. Like that.
It's
I think,
acceptance.
I think it's a cycle. He's talking about a cycle.
Yeah,
You may be depressed now, but it'll be better.
yeah.
It goes, every one of those things goes back again, wind returns back again. A kind of a cycle of life,
Mm-hmm.
which is
I
kind
like
of
that,
nice,
Carolyn.
actually.
Isn't it like the putting your hand in one pocket and it said, I'm everything. And then you put your hand in the other pocket and it says, I'm nothing. So you're between the two. And
Yes.
actually in Judaism, we're told that we should do whatever we can to make it a better world,
Yeah.
tikkun olam.
Tikkun
So
olam.
even if you're nothing, you still can do a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging that just like there are many faces of God, there are many faces of being human. Psychologically, nobody can stay in that moment where life is full of meaning. Our life is a journey through the ups and downs of having meaning, losing meaning, feeling hopeful, feeling loss. And this may be, a book that just gives us, or at least these lines give us a moment acknowledging that. Doesn't mean we have to stay there, but I think it's the many faces of humanity reflected here, of being human.
And Jason?
Sorry, I was actually going to say the piece that Ruth said, so I put my hand down.
Okay. All right. Well, those are all every response, even the critical one, are good responses to this text. I think that, but just getting back to something slightly different, consider the committee that decided to put this book into the Bible. Now, it might have flown on the notion that they would have believed this was written by Solomon, so that even if they disagreed with the opening chapter, Shlomo wrote it, and how could we not put what Shlomo wrote into the Tanakh? All right, let's read on a bit more.
Wanted to add one thing, just like some of our great, one of the things we love about Genesis and Exodus is that we don't see perfect people in those Bibles, and we're able to better relate to them and identify, because we don't see Moses for instance, as a hero every moment. In the beginning, it always strikes me that he wants to run away. I think that's just so human. And, he has a stutter initially. And so and those stories weren't erased in the Bible. So it doesn't surprise me that something like this is here.
All such things are wearisome. No man can ever state them. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear enough of hearing. Only that shall happen which has happened. Only that occur which has occurred. There is nothing new beneath the sun. Now, if nothing else comes out of this book, that phrase, I mean, it permeates modern Israeli Hebrew. Ein chadash tachat hashamesh. Ein chadash tachat hashamesh. There's nothing new. Well, here it's Ein kol chadash tachat hashamesh, which is more powerful. There's absolutely nothing new under the sun. Sometimes, I'll read another verse and then I'm interested in your responses. Sometimes there is a phenomenon of which they say, look, this one is new. It occurred long since in ages that went by before us. The earlier ones are not remembered, so too those that will occur later will no more be remembered than those that occur at the very end. Ein chadash tachat hashamesh. AI comes along, AI, shmei, we've seen this, we've seen stuff like this before, which is arguable, by the way, as we all know. Wars and peace and,
A different time.
hybrid cuisine. And so this is an old guy saying, we're all part of this flow into the sea. And there's ultimately nothing that's going to distinguish us. Now, I remember when I studied this with my friend, his name is Eitan. He's a couple years older than I am. We've been studying together for a long time, and originally that age difference seemed more powerful than it does now as I've crossed the transom into the 70s. But he said, when I go, my kids will miss me, and maybe my grandkids will miss me. But 3 or 4 generations down the road, who's going to remember that I walked the earth? And he was willing to accept that. And it is a kind of a statement about, well, I'm not sure what it's a statement about. I'm just throwing it out. I'm not going to interpret it any further. But any other reactions? Christine, please.
I actually find this passage somewhat comforting, because it's basically saying, you're here, you can't really change everything. We're just little beings. But as Ruth said, we and Betsy, we have the obligation to do what we can do. And yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, but you know what? We still have to try to create less injustice and to make it better. Huh?
Christine,
Yeah.
there's nothing new under the sun. That is a very general statement.
Yeah.
But it's new to each one of us as
Exactly.
we experience it, because we've never experienced it before.
Precisely.
So, I see my life as a continual renewal because of the study that I do and the teaching that I do and my conversations with you and other people. I have a very hard time accepting this. And as I said, it really irritates me because it can only lead to passivity. I can't change everything. Well, what can you change? Can I change anything? Should I just float along until I die? Should I just exist, whatever that means. That's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
well,
not, it's
I see
not
that.
the human spirit. I mean, you could take God totally out of the picture. It's not what we do.
yeah.
And it's not what we have done from the beginning of time. I can't stand this.
Yeah, it's pessimism rather
It
than
is pessimism.
optimism.
Yeah,
Well,
it is. It's real pessimism to the
Yes,
point. It's so negative to me
yeah.
that I don't see how Kohelet gets out of bed in the morning.
Well, I bracketed by saying, well, of course, a king would say that, right? Because he doesn't want a revolution. So I kind of bracketed.
Well, I would add an additional layer to that. In addition to
Yeah.
being pessimistic and the despair, I would also add bitterness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
bitter.
Very bitter.
Let
too.
us listen to Rabbi. What did he talk about in his sermons? Did he
Right.
talk about optimism? Even if it's boiling hot outside, you go outside and you say, look at that beautiful tree. I
Yeah.
mean, it's difficult. We're not saying it's not difficult, but it's something that each person has to decide for themselves.
Yes.
Maybe
I
He's
totally
not
agree.
saying
That's
that,
the
Ruth.
point of
He's
the
not
book.
saying that. He's not saying go out and try. He's saying I give up right now. I give up. There's nothing that I can do.
Right.
I'm
this is-
nothing.
I want to agree with
blank. I'm a cipher.
But before we call it a day, I want to read another couple verses. Betsy's had her hand up. And then
I
before,
just wanted to respond to that because I still do believe that this is a state of being in life. And maybe the point of the book is exactly your response, because everything else in Judaism tells us that we are not allowed to buy into this. Everything else in
Yeah.
Judaism
we
says
dispute it.
you have to go out and try to change the world, that you
Yeah.
are, you're, from the idea that, you don't have to fix everything, but you're not free from trying, that
Yeah.
little thought, and the idea that, the reform movement has picked up that social action is so important. Everything else in Judaism says, don't give in to this. So maybe the point of the book is just to say, is to get you riled up to say, I'm not going to be this way. Our religion has a response to this, and I'm going to go with that.
but so a couple more verses, and I think we have to call it a morning. I, Kohelet, was king in Jerusalem over Israel. I set my mind to study and to probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun. I got a PhD in philosophy, and then I got a PhD in biology. And then on top of that, I got a PhD from Oxford in English literature. I know a whole ton of things. An unhappy business that which God gave men to be concerned with. I observed all the happenings beneath the sun, or a PhD in history. And I found that all is futile in a pursuit of wind, a twisted thing that can, I'm going to stop there.
Yeah.
This amplifies, this doesn't modify, this amplifies what we've already been talking about. And so, maybe we should have done the Elisha and Elijah story second. That leaves you with on a higher note. But I just love this guy. I just really love this guy. And not, I guess I kind of agree with Betsy in that it reflects a certain mood that that is quite comprehensible. I had a teacher. I started studying with him in 1976, named Norbert Samuelson, and my relationship with him over the years was off again, on again. I didn't do my doctorate with him. He was at Temple University in Philadelphia. I went to Brandeis instead, but we kept in touch. And toward the end of his life, we began to study together once a week for a few years. We did this. He had retired from Arizona State University to Chicago, where he grew up. Oddly, I know the people from Chicago retire to Phoenix. They don't retire from Phoenix to Chicago. But he grew up there in a nice apartment. I've been several times. And he got Parkinson's. He had Parkinson's, And as his life began to slow down, I wouldn't say he became cynical like Ecclesiastes, but he kind of like he expressed more than once a sense that, you know, his life had kind of ended. You know, he was ready to die, and he didn't see any reason to pursue things any further. He didn't commit suicide. He died. The disease took his life away. And then I was living in Columbia, Missouri at the time, which is an airplane flight to Chicago. And I had the day off, and I went to his funeral, expecting to have to hitch a ride from the funeral home to the cemetery, only to learn that he had elected to be cremated. Now, I'm not opposed. I'm not in favor of cremation, but this guy was a rabbi and a major scholar of Jewish thought, and I was a little surprised that he elected to have his remains treated that way. But it sort of felt like a continuation of the mood that he had been expressing in the previous couple of years. Now, I'm not saying he was exactly like Kohelet, but he did reflect a change of mood from when he was a really vibrant guy. He trained to run triathlons. I don't know that he actually ever did a triathlon. And, you know, enormously prolific and involved in Jewish life and academic life. And the last few years of his life, he just was, you know, he said he wasn't disappointed. And I wasn't hearing disappointment in his condition. But, you know, all the juice had run out of him. All the air had been let out of his balloon. A couple of hands. Yeah,
Rabbi, I knew him very well. He was at Indiana University, and he was our Hillel rabbi for 5 years. He and his wife were very good friends of ours, or maybe it was from West Lafayette. Anyway, in Indiana, we knew him so well. They adopted a child.
Say that again? He adopted 2 kids, yeah.
Yes, they adopted their kids, and I remember them saying, they just used to come to our house, and we would just have, my husband was very much into Jewish philosophy, and we would have discussions, and he was wonderful. I'm so sorry to hear he died. I had my son look him up, and I wondered where he was, because I always remember him. I'm talking about the 60s.
Yeah, he died a couple of years ago.
Okay. Wonderful person. Yeah.
Christine.
Well, the passage basically is an indulgence from privilege. You know, the people on top can be cynical. The people on top can despair about the world and so on and so forth, and leave it there. But the rest of us, you know, we can notice it. We can be comforted it in the sense that a dominant ideology can feel comforting from time to time. But basically, you know, it's patriarchal ideology with a king. And you have to like understand it as that. And you know, so tikkun olam, let us like change what we can change. And especially this notion that, you know, that you can't change anything. You can't do anything about it. The world will go on. How many social movements have been told that, you know, that resulted in profound social change? It's the way of the world, you know, and so on. And so it's up to us to like, yeah, we can have moments where when we buy into that, but no, no, we have to struggle.
Yeah. So Sherry, I should have expressed more sort of I don't know, commonality with you. I knew him on and off from 1976 to maybe 2021. I knew him through all 3 of his wives.
Yeah.
We
saw that when we looked him
daunting.
No, but he really got me into thinking about how should I say, about Judaism in a different way than the way I was raised. And he was so intellectual and so brilliant. And he was just a new rabbi.
Yeah.
So he must have been like 25, 30.
Wow.
He left Hebrew Union College to go to Indiana. There was a confluence of a good department of philosophy where he got his doctorate and the position of Hillel director at Indiana. All right, folks. So this is how I do it, more or less. And I see how you do it, by the way. And I'm really impressed that you guys do it. Sandra.
Well, I just wanted to say, you know, we say, oh, we can't save the world, but the whole thing is, you know, you can do something.
Yes,
I don't know I cuddle babies once a week at in the NICU, the
Yeah.
drug babies. And that's my way of doing something to, not to save the world, but to make it a little better for,
Yeah.
at least for those babies.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I like, I like Christine's, you have to bring in the patriarchal nature of the Hebrew Bible. I never heard that before. I have to think about that some. The patriarchal nature of the Hebrew Bible, and he was the king. And he's lying in bed, and maybe he's, chewing on a mutton leg or something. And he can be, he can lie there in his butt, and and the way I always put it, his bunions were bothering him, and his teeth were bothering him. You know what it's like to have teeth in, and that's not even way back into antiquity. Like, having bad teeth 200 years ago was a big problem. And he's got all these pains and aches and pains, and he fought a war and he built a temple, if we're going to pretend it was Solomon. And here I am, it's the end of things. But then Sandra goes and cuddles babies. All right, so we don't have to agree with the guy, but I do think I like reading it because it gives an opportunity to build a counter view, which is kind of what we did in reading this chapter. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. And
Shabbat
thank you
shalom,
very
and
much,
thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
All
I'm
right.
glad I finally got on.
Yeah.
Shabbat shalom.
Everyone have a cool week if you can. And stay well.